Okay.
All right, you guys, welcome to week 10. Welcome, Chef Genevieve and everybody who is joining us today. So week 10, you guys, it's coming down to the end pretty soon. And I do have quick announcements for you guys. The first one, obviously, I do want to make it more real for you guys on this last day to submit, anything for this class. So we are just 18 days away from finishing this block. Can you believe that? 18 days, right? So it's about a little bit over 2 weeks. So Sunday, May 12th will be the last day to submit anything for this class. Most of it is going to be obviously week 12 that we're going to be working with around that time. For makeups, I've been telling you that the last day to submit makeups is going to be at the end of week 11. And this is going to be Tuesday, May 7th, right? So please keep that in mind. Make a quick note for yourself. Take a look at your grades now. If you see that there's room for improvement by submitting a makeup, if you're not too sure, you can always email me and I can walk you through it. But you do have the opportunity still to do that. You have up to 3 makeups to submit. But we're looking at about Tuesday, May 7th to be the last day. So please get your makeups in, right? And we have about 18 days left.
The reason I want to piggyback on this and emphasize that May 12th deadline, you guys, is because it's a deadline that even Chef Carla and I have to adhere to because it's the end of the block. We have to turn in our grades by a certain time, and that comes from our boss's bosses. So we really, truly can't accept any work after that because grades will have been sent in and things will have started to have gone through the system. So write that date down, take it really seriously. It's not necessarily like our weekly deadlines. It's a really, really firm deadline. So we're getting close to the end. Take a look tonight at your grades. See if you're missing anything. Get those makeups done sooner rather than later. It would be easier for the next 3 weeks, say you were missing 3 assignments, to do 2 assignments each week instead of in week 12 trying to do 4 assignments, right? So start right now, checking on your grades, seeing if anything's missing, and let us know if you have any questions or need help.
Thank you, Chef. Okay, you guys, so last week, you guys, we did the pie, right? So you had 2 components to do. You had a pie dough to do, and of course, you had the choice of doing either the apple pie or the blueberry pie, which covered the cooked juice method. So, Chef Genevieve, how did that look?
I've seen a ton of buttery, flaky pie crust. The biggest, we're actually talking about it in the chat right now. The biggest challenge I saw this week was the pie filling and it not getting as thick as you expected it to be. I do think that each individual person had a different amount of filling in their pie. One of those reasons is because the apples that you get at the grocery store aren't a scientific same size. A large apple isn't going to be the same size for everybody that goes to buy a large apple. So I saw some pies that were really, really filled, some pies that were underfilled. So now that you have experimented, know that that cornstarch is a little bit of a variable. If you need to increase that starch a little bit, especially for your apple pie, which is the one that most people seem to have an issue with, you can do that. You can play with it. And remember, letting your fruit soak in that sugar and starch for a little bit before putting it into your pie and popping it into the oven. I saw gorgeous presentations over and over and over again. I saw lattice crust. I saw designs cut into your crust. I saw beautiful edging around your pies. Something that also I almost always see on Pie Week is a lot of burnt edges. I don't think I saw any burnt edges, you guys. So I was really, really proud of you. I could tell that you're using your instincts as far as color and smell. Dough, pie dough specifically, is one of my favorite products. So I encourage you to keep practicing. Again, remember, it's a great one that keeps in the freezer for a really long time. So even if you just want a day practicing making pie dough, you don't necessarily need a dough. You can do that, pop it into the freezer, and then use it as needed. One last thing, I saw a few people use their extra dough to make hand pies or small mini personal pies. I love it. It's a great way to use your leftover resources. At the bakeries that I've worked at, we did exactly that. With our excess pie crust, we made little hand pies, sold them individually. So be resourceful each week because it also pushes you guys to be more creative. And that's what I've got for you.
Well, that's funny, Matthew. You were cursing too much making the pie dough. I was just enjoying looking at the chat.
The other thing I will tell you is that pie dough does take some upper body strength, because after it comes out of the fridge, after you've chilled it, it's going to be really hard. It's actually my least favorite part of the process because I don't have a ton of upper body strength. But you just have to be patient, work that dough. As it starts to cool down, come back down in temperature, it's going to be a bit more pliable, and you have to be patient with it. I know a lot of people said that my dough teared, but if you're rolling too quickly, that's when you're going to see those tears. So just take your time. That's a delicate process. And make sure that you let your dough chill, because it's going to come together much more, and you'll see lots of tearing.
Cool. Thank you, Chef. I just wanted to say, you guys, that when I do apple pie, I prefer to do the cooked fruit method, which is sauteing the apples, right? Just start with a little butter, a little sugar, sauteing the apples. Because the reason why is because you're going to be adding the slurry inside, and you're going to ensure that that slurry will thicken up. And so I take it all the way up to when it comes to a boil. So you know that the entire mixture, the entire filling is going inside the pie tin with cooked juice already. You know, the apples are also softened by sauteing them a little bit. So I kind of like that method. So maybe next time you guys can try that. I know for this week, obviously, we needed to do just kind of tossing the fruit. If you want to do that again, especially if you had a little issues with the juices not thickening up, you can always add a little bit more cornstarch, you know, just to see if that works for you. Okay, you guys, so this week, you know, this is one of my favorite doughs that we're going to be working. This one is called pâte à choux, right? So we're going to be working with pâte à choux, which is a type of dough. We're going to be making a filling called pastry crème, which is a stovetop up custard. And of course, we're going to be assembling those two together, and we're going to make something called eclairs, okay? So pâte à choux, it's a dough that is so versatile. You can make so many different things with this. It's amazing. I love this dough because not only you can make things, let's say, for sweet, right, desserts, but you can also make savory items with this as well. And I'm going to show you guys some of these items that you can make out of just one dough, pâte à choux. So obviously, these are eclairs that we're going to be making this week. We're going to be piping them kind of elongated, right? And so this is eclairs that we're going to do, and this is the pastry cream that we're going to be filling in the inside. You can either do just melted straight chocolate, or you can do a ganache. I believe this one of the videos that you guys have available this week in your resources is the research material is how to make a ganache. And we'll talk about that, of course. So you can make eclairs. You can also make something called cream puffs, right? Very cool. You can either slice them in half, just like this, or you can actually just, from the bottom, you can fill them up, you know? And so they can stay covered completely, like a hole. And of course, you can eat them. Delicious, right? It can be whipped cream. It could be pastry cream inside. And we'll talk about how to flavor pastry cream, which, you know, I prefer for you guys to kind of keep it safe this week by just doing the vanilla flavor, but we'll just briefly talk about how to flavor custards. The other thing you can make is something called swan, right? Look how gorgeous that is. Very simple as well. You can make some churros out of that, so it's a perfect dough to fry it as well, right? So some churros, amazing. I love making churros out of this dough because this dough is super sticky. It's very high in moisture. There's going to be butter, water, eggs inside. And so when you fry it, of course, they expand like a little, pillow. And when you eat them, they're so tender and soft versus, you know, the ones that you eat, like the Mexican churros. Some of them, they're a little bit on the firmer side. But you can make it firmer by cutting back the eggs, right? So you can definitely manipulate this recipe by cutting back a little bit of the eggs to make a firmer churro, if that's you prefer. You can make something called gruyères. Gruyères, it's just this dough, pâte à choux. You can add some cheese to it. You can add some spices. You can add herbs inside. And you can then bake it after that, right? Mix it into the dough. And these ones are actually made, the ones that I found, they're actually made with lobster and cheddar. Delicious. So it's savory. You add a little salt and pepper to it. Cayenne, if you like it, a little spicy. And you just pipe it onto a parchment, you know, a sheet pan with parchment. and you bake it at I always like to bake it at 350, so until it gets golden brown. And they're like little cheesy balls, delicious. I love this stuff. The other thing that you can make is something called croquembouche out of this dough. And this is just a bunch of like different little cream puffs that once you fill them with pastry cream, you can dip them in straight caramel, like hard. And then, of course, you glue them together. The sugar's going to help you glue them together in this kind of like cone shape. And then you put like, the same sugar that you use it as a glue is going to be a sponge sugar. So you kind of throw the sugar around. But this is a beautiful dessert that is very common in French weddings, right? Beautiful. They make it big. Sometimes they decorate it with sugars around each little, little cream puff. They do like marzipan flowers in it, just make this gorgeous presentation. It takes a while to make, and they're very expensive also, to charge. And something else that you can make out of this is called Paris breads. And this is a dessert that was actually created in honor of a bicycle race in France. They do have lots of bicycle races out there. And this one went from the city of Paris and ended up in the city of Brest, right? Which is in close to the Normandy section. I think it's the Brittany area in France. And it's supposed to resemble a bicycle wheel. That's why it's round. So you just pipe it round, right, in a circle. And then put a little egg wash on top. You sprinkle some sliced almonds, and then you bake it off. Now, let me explain really quickly. And there's more things you can make. I know I left so many of them, you guys. But you can make fritters out of this, And fritters is great. I love the, like, fresh cod's fritters. You just chop up your cod. You mix it into the dough, a little salt, maybe some herbs. And then you fry them together, serve them with an aioli. Amazing, okay? They're delicious. All right, so I know you guys probably see that I'm very excited about this dough, and I want you guys to get excited too. So I would just want to say this week you have two things you got to make, and the third one is assembling everything together. So pâte à choux, pastry cream, and assemble. So I want to say you guys that it is going to be a heavy week in production. So I want you guys to kind of spread your work around, and you can do it. One day you can do the pâte à choux. You're going to be piping and baking. You can hold the baked items. The next day you can do the pastry cream, make it, cool it. And the third day, if you guys want to stretch it even the third day, then you can assemble everything together. Okay, so I recommend to do that in that specific order so you don't allow the custard to sit too long after you cook it. Okay, so let me explain a little bit about this dough. So this dough actually translates to cabbage paste, and the reason why the French call it choux, it just means cabbage. It's just the way that it shapes when it bakes. It's really high in moisture. Like I mentioned, there's eggs, there's water, and there's actually a bunch of, there's some butter as well. So those three ingredients are high in moisture, and they're going to create this very sticky dough. And because it's very high in moisture, the way that it works is that it's leavened just simply through steam, right? So in order to take advantage of that steam, in order to create steam, so the little pastry starts to grow and grow in the oven, we gotta bake it in this specific way, right? So the very first thing is you gotta bake it at a higher temperature, meaning 375 to 400 degrees. You wanna make sure that it's baked at that high temperature because the idea is to start heating up the dough, heating it up quickly. And through the heating process, you're gonna start creating a lot of, steam inside because there's a lot of moisture. And that steam is gonna create pressure into that little shape that you're going to be piping, and it's going to start expanding, right? Like a little balloon. We're making it clear, so they're going to be expanding sideways as well. But what we want is for a lot of expansion because what we want is hollow. We want to make sure the inside is nice and hollow. If it's hollow, it's going to you're going to have plenty of space so you can fill it with pastry cream later on. If there's not a lot of expansion, obviously it's going to stay kind of tight and small, and now you don't have a lot of space to put the filling inside. So I'm going to explain this very, very carefully to you guys, and please take notes on this. This is where the students make the biggest mistake making pâte à choux. So you got to bake at a high temperature, right? So you got to bake between 375 to 400 degrees. I recommend 400 degrees just because it's hotter. and it's going to create that steam a little bit faster, and it's going to create the expansion. You're going to bake it, right? And I'm not going to give you a time because depending on the size of the eclair that you're going to pipe, it depends on how long you're going to bake. But you really got to be on top of that oven, making sure that things are not going to burn, obviously, or making sure that we look for color. So you're going to bake it until the pastry has a medium to golden brown color. We want to make sure we see color. And let me go ahead and show you. Let me see. I do have a picture of the color that we're looking for. Actually, well, that's a little too dark. Let me go ahead. Okay, this is the color that we're looking for. So take a look at this, right? Golden brown. Sometimes the expansion creates like this little cracks, especially if you guys end up using a star tip. You can use a star tip if you like, or you can actually go with solid tip or no tip at all. But you definitely need a piping bag for this week. And so sometimes this little cracks that you guys see right here from the expansion, I even look for a little bit of color on those little cracks, because that means that if I have color everywhere, that means I have crust, and the crust is not going to collapse on me, right? So I look for golden brown color. Now, why do I look for golden brown color? Because the next step you're going to do is what can collapse the pastry, you know, if the color is not completely there. So the next step is actually when you get to the golden brown color, you're going to be bringing down the temperature of the oven. You're going to bring it down to between 300 to 325. So what happens to steam, you guys? You have a boiling water, right? You have a lot of steam coming out of the pot. What happens when you turn off the pot, right? What happens to that steam? You see the steam going less and less and less and less and less because it's cooling down. So what's going to happen inside the little pastry is that, you know, you have a lot of steam forming because the heat is high, but the moment you turn the temperature down, the steam is going to get less and less and less. And now, if your pastry looks still too light in color, like bright yellow, you know, like too light, it's going to collapse and it's going to stay flat. And sometimes you cannot fix that. Once it's flat, it's trash. So what I'm trying to avoid for you guys is a headache of going through the process of making the dough, and then of course it's going to collapse in the oven. So it's super important that you start at 400 degrees, you know, take it all the way until it's golden brown, right? And then turn the temperature down, and you know that the crust, because it's very stiff, is not going to allow that pastry to collapse anymore. So what are we doing now at a lower temperature? We're actually drying out the inside of it. We're making sure that the inside is dry. At that moment, you guys, if you want to pull one out of the oven and crack it and look inside, there's still a lot of moisture inside, lots of moisture. And so it gives you that feeling that it's still kind of, you know, wet, you know, so you want to dry it out. And I would suggest that after you bring the temperature down, dry it out maybe for another 15 to 20 minutes. If you want, cool down the oven as much as you can and then close it back. That way, you know, the pastry doesn't continue getting darker and darker. But at a lower temperature, the pastry should remain almost the same color that you took it, you know, which is like medium brown color is nice. So it's very important that you guys do that process. After you finish taking it out of the oven, of course, let it completely cool down. And, you know, then, of course, they're ready to be filled if you have your pastry cream ready. So let's talk really quickly about the process on how to make it. I'm going to go ahead and share with you guys the recipe for pâte à choux. Oh, I have it hidden right here. Okay, here it is. So I'm going to go ahead and share that with you guys. So here's the technique, and let me go ahead and make it just a little larger. I suggest, you guys, to make this a little bit smaller. This recipe makes 3 pounds, 11 ounces. I think that's a lot. If you want to cut this recipe in half, you're welcome to do it. You can still do it, you know, like go with half a teaspoon right here. It calls for about, you know, it says 1 pound and 4 ounces. That's a total of 20 ounces of eggs, okay, you guys? Whole eggs is what we want. So this is 16 plus 4, that's 20 ounces. 16 plus 2, that's 18 ounces of milk or water. I suggest to save your milk for the pastry cream and just go straight with water for this recipe. It's going to be more affordable, obviously. So go with water, right? This is 18 ounces total. You need 9 ounces of butter, and this is 1 teaspoon of salt, 12 ounces of bread flour. And it's really important, you guys. I cannot stress enough how important is the bread flour here. I do have a lot of students that tell me, Chef, my pastries, they ended up collapsing. They deflated, right? So one of my questions is, was it golden brown? I'm going to ask you first. Was it golden brown before you turn the temperature down? Did you use bread flour? Bread flour has the highest amount of protein, which is going to hold the shape a little better, right? So it's not going to allow it to collapse, but it's going to hold the shape. There's a lot of fat in here, and bread flour has to be strong enough, obviously, to deal with a lot of fat and a lot of liquid, so you can create that structure. So what you want to do first is put your water, your butter, your salt into a pot, and I would say to about medium-sized pot or large-sized pot, and you're going to bring that to a full boil. The next step after bringing it to a full boil is take it off the heat, and you guys are going to be adding the bread flour. You don't need to sift it. You just add it all inside, all at once. You're going to be adding it into the liquid that just came to a boil. Once it comes, once the flour comes into the pot, remember you have a starch and you guys have a hot liquid, right? So that's right away it's going to start forming something called gelatinization, which means that the starch will start absorbing the liquid and swelling up and thickening up. So you guys are going to notice that as soon as you add the flour, it's going to start looking, you got to move it, you guys. If you can use a rubber spatula, a rubber spatula will be fine, but a wooden spatula is better because you need something stiff and firm, just to kind of be, the dough is going to become very, very firm. So you just need something to keep moving it around. And at this point, what we're doing is just making sure that the liquid comes together with the flour, everything gets moistened, right? And we don't see pockets of dry flour around. So break those lumps. Keep mixing it around. Once you see that everything looks uniform and wet, then put it back onto the heat, right? And you're going to bring, I would say medium to medium high heat is very important at this point. So medium to medium high heat, and you're going to start cooking. It's going to look like a thick mashed potato. You're going to start cooking that for about 3 minutes. I always say 3 minutes. It works for me really great, you guys. 3 minutes is going to give me enough time to evaporate as much liquid as I can, right? Because the liquid that I prefer to go inside is the liquid of the eggs. Because eggs have structure, they have protein, and they're going to help me hold the shape a little better of my pastries. So once you cook it for 3 minutes, then if you guys have a mixing, a mixer, right? A KitchenAid. If you guys have a KitchenAid, you guys can put it inside the KitchenAid bowl. If you guys do not have a KitchenAid, put it into a regular bowl, right? The next step is to start cooling it down. I want you guys to take a look at the pot. There's actually one photograph that you have to take. Take a look at the pot after you remove the dough. If your heat was medium to medium high heat, that means you're going to have a skin, like a coating on the bottom of your pot. That tells us that your heat was high enough and that you ended up drying out the moisture as much as you could from the dough, right? If there's hardly any skin on the bottom, maybe your heat was too low, and therefore now your dough has a little bit too much moisture, therefore now you're adding less eggs into it, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind. So take a picture of that film that you see on the bottom of your pot. It's one of your requirements for this week. Oh yeah, Chef Genevieve.
If you're using a nonstick pot, which you can definitely do, you might not see as much of a film. So a few other visual indicators is you really want that to be a dough ball. So that means you've basically taken most of that moisture back out. It will still look really shiny and smooth, but it won't be sticky. It won't stick to the sides of your pan. It definitely won't stick to the bottom. So just make sure you're giving it that time. But if I wanted to warn you, if you're using nonstick, you might not see as much of a film. Still take a picture for me. Just take the picture just in case.
And you can explain in your narrative, I was using a nonstick pot, and therefore maybe there's nothing, that got stuck on the bottom, right? So you can explain, and we're okay with that, you guys. So the next step is to cool down the dough. Either you're going to do it with a handheld mix, right? Cool it down, keep moving it around. You can do it with a spoon, just using your hands, or you can simply put a paddle and you're going to start cooling it down. And what I usually look for is that there's no more steam coming out, and that gives me the idea that the temperature of the mashed potato looking dough is actually cooler. Roughly, I know the video that you guys have for this week to watch, it says to bring it down to about 120 degrees. That's a safe temperature so your eggs don't cook. The next step is to start adding the eggs. And I suggest to add the eggs maybe one at a time, right? One at a time, just because if this dough, if we make the mistake of making it too wet, too loose, there's no way of fixing it. Once it's all loose and, drippy, like I'm going to show you a way to test it out. Then there's, what that means is that when you guys start piping your shapes, your eclair shapes, they're going to spread out too much onto the sheet pan. So by adding one egg at a time and mixing it really well and adding another egg at a time, you guys are going to notice the dough starts looking from all broken and separated to like coming together, as a whole dough. It's kind of sticky. So let me show you that video. The book, by the way, you guys, it tells you, you can see right here, step by step, right? A little bit step by step on how to do this. And this is sort of like the way it looks at the end. So I have a couple pictures to show you, right? So this is one way of testing the dough. You grab a little bit from the mixture, and this is going to be roughly after you have added, let me take a look at the recipe. It says 1 pound and 4 ounces. So let's say, for example, maybe roughly after a pound, you're going to start noticing that the mixture starts looking a little bit more, softer, stretchy. Definitely when you guys finish adding the last amount, it's going to look something like this right here. So grab a small amount and stretch it. If you see that the stretch, obviously stretch it not too fast, but if you see that the stretch holds together, right? It's not sagging, but it holds the stretch nicely. That means that, that's one way of testing it out. Another way is, in your video, you guys have another way of doing it. Chef Ann is going to show you guys in the video to pick up the paddle and lift it up, and it's going to form kind of like a V shape of the dough, right? So a V shape, and you will see the video. So there's two ways of testing this dough to make sure that, to make sure that we know that when we pipe it, it's going to hold a nice round shape that we're going to give this eclair. All right, so the next step is obviously, yes, Chef Genevieve.
I had written down in the chat that the eggs are a variable. And what I mean by that is that you might not have to use all of them. That's what we're talking about. That's why you want to add them one at a time, because in this case, once you've achieved that paste consistency, that correct sort of thickened paste, you don't want to keep going. You don't want to add more eggs. It will negatively affect your product. So in this, I know that every week we've really pushed in that you need to use the exact amount of each ingredient, but in this particular formula, the eggs are a variable.
Exactly, and it all depends on how much did you heat the mixture when you're cooking it, So if you ended up heating it or cooking it too long, that means it's drier, so it's going to need more egg. But if you didn't heat it enough, that means there's more moisture, so you're going to need less egg, right? And we can't really tell. So the best way is by testing it out. And I always test it out like straight like this, so you can hold the shape. So yeah, like that, Mandy. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and show you now after you get the right consistency, of course. It's going to be a very sticky dough, you guys. You do need a piping bag, right? If you do not have a piping bag, I know we've told other classes that maybe one of those 1 gallon, Ziploc bags might work. I do recommend a piping bag if you can, but if not, then, a Ziploc bag will work. But obviously something that's large, because this dough, again, is kind of sticky. You definitely need something a little larger to hold the entire dough amount. Well, don't fill it up too high. So what you want to do is, if you have tips, large tips, whether it's a start tip or a solid tip, you guys can use it. If you do not have any tips, don't worry. You don't need to use it. You can just cut, the tip, the size of the tip off. You can cut it up to I would say about 3/4 of an inch to an inch in thickness. Cut it off, and you're going to be piping this elongated shapes like this, right? This one, it has a start tip, so that's why it looks a little, you can see the lines across. This one was piped without a star tip, so it looks a little bit more solid. I recommend you guys to pipe between, I would say maybe 5 inches in length is good. You guys will see Chef Ann in the video is going to show you how to make lines and how to prep your parchment so you're able to pipe, even shapes. Now I'm going to tell you guys, there's a couple of ways of doing it. You can either simply take your parchment, you can do lines with 5 inches in length. Make sure that you leave maybe about 2 inches, 2.5 inches between each line because they do grow, they expand quite wide, right? But make the lines with a pencil if you can. Don't use a Sharpie. And then flip the parchment over so that the pencil marks are going to stay on the bottom. So they're not coming in contact with your dough. So you're going to be piping. The piping, I think, is going to be the hardest thing. The way that you do is you keep twisting the bag, right? So make sure that your bag is nice and tight and fill. And you just kind of pipe it. If you guys want to, you guys will see the videos of Chef Ann doing it. But if you squeeze hard, obviously you got to move fast. If you squeeze slow, right, gentle, you're going to move slow. So it depends on how much of that mixture is coming out that you're moving, to the back, right? If you make a mistake, if you say, wow, this is an ugly piping, then grab a rubber spatula, scoop it back up, right? Especially if you have a bowl scraper that works so great. Scoop it back up, put it back into the bowl, and reuse it. You don't have to bake that. Yes.
I actually have a picture I'd love to share, if you don't mind, Chef, of some poorly piped eclairs. So this is what we want to avoid. Here, you can see that not only do we have some that are obviously misshapen, but this one I like to call the caterpillar. What they've done with their piping tube is they've squeezed and stopped, squeezed and stopped, squeezed and stopped. And that's what's created those little ridges. It's going to have that sort of wonky shape when it bakes up and have a harder time hollowing out in the center. The more misshapen your piped eclairs are, the harder time it has getting an even hollow center. So you can see these eclairs here, she's getting much closer with her piping. We can still see some of those ridges, but I pulled up this example here. Here's a really smooth piped eclair. The trick to getting a smooth piped eclair is making sure that the end of your piping bag is twisted up so that your pat of shoe is not going to pipe out of the other end, and it's one squeeze. You want to prepare yourself for one smooth squeeze and then stop. You can take a wet finger to tap the little tail of your eclair at the end. But the smoother of a tube that you can get with that piping, the more success you're going to have with a really even hollowed out center. So I definitely don't expect perfection. Piping takes a ton of practice. Don't get discouraged if some look silly. You should have enough batter to really get a lot of practice and a lot of tries in. So.
Yeah, exactly. And when it comes to this dough, you guys, it's really important that you do actually pipe more than what you're presenting, because you can always, at the end, you don't know how badly shapen they look, especially after coming out of the oven, The expansion sometimes can take a different route. They grow kind of funny. So you can always pipe more and bake more so you can pick the best ones at the end, okay? So like Chef said, we're not expecting perfection, but try your best. You can always scoop them back up so you can repipe them again, So, okay, you guys, let me go back again to the pictures, right? And Chef mentioned something. If the dough is so sticky that if you try to smooth out the ends, you want to make sure that they look kind of round and smooth, but the dough is too sticky, so with a dry finger, it's going to stick all over your finger. So dip it in water, and then you can go ahead and start smoothing up the top so that there's no tips, kind of sticking out. Okay, so let's now talk a little bit about the pastry cream. The pastry cream is the next thing that you guys are going to be making. This is a stovetop custard. In a custard, of course, anything that we call a custard, that means there's eggs in it. For this pastry cream, it is usually thickened with eggs, and it's thickened with cornstarch, right? So we're going to be using that cornstarch again. All right, so what you want to start first is you're going to bring the sugar and the milk to a quick, it's called a scald. I know it says a boil right here, you guys, but I don't recommend a boil. I would recommend is to do something less than a simmer. I call that a scald. And what that means is that when you bring in this to heating it up, right, the liquid, you see just the little bubbles forming on the side of the pot. When you see just little bubbles forming, turn it off, right? That's called a scald. Very gentle heating. And the reason why is because you're going to be adding that milk into to the next step, which is the eggs and the cornstarch and the sugar. So you're going to have three things you're going to do. You're going to make sure that you have your sugar, milk in a pot. In a separate bowl, you're going to be putting the egg yolks, the whole eggs, the cornstarch, and the sugar, and you're going to be whisking them really, really well. Make sure you break down the proteins really well. I say whisk maybe for about maybe a minute or two, breaking down the proteins really well. Once they're whisked and broken down, you're going to take the scalded milk and you're going to be adding it little bit at a time. You know, we're going to be tempering. And tempering means that you have a sensitive ingredient, right? You have eggs that are sensitive to heat, but you're adding a hot liquid inside. So we don't want to add it all at once because it's going to heat up the mixture so quickly that it's going to start cooking the eggs. That's why it's important just to bring the liquid to a scald so it doesn't cook the eggs. But tempering just means that you're slowly bringing the temperature of the sensitive ingredient. You're slowly raising the temperature, slowly raising it up. And that way it's not going to cook the eggs on you. So you're going to be tempering. I always like to add a third of the milk, whisk it really well, break it down, add another third of the milk, right, into the eggs and cornstarch mixture, and until you completely finish the last stir. Once you completely finish the last stir, now you have the milk, you have all these ingredients together in a bowl. So you're going to be bringing them back into the pot, and you're going to bring them to a full boil. Very important, you guys. Once you have everything tempered and you put it back into the pot, I recommend to work at a medium heat, right? There's a couple of things that can happen. We have a cornstarch inside, right? So that's going to it's going to firm up with you. You know, it's going to firm up when it comes in contact with heat, especially as it's getting closer to boiling, right? So you need your rubber spatula, you need a whisk close by. Work with medium heat so you can slowly start thickening up that cornstarch. So you're going to notice I usually start with medium heat with my rubber spatula, and I keep moving it and moving it around. And it's going to be very noticeable, of course, when everything starts to thicken up. When you start seeing things beginning to thicken up, grab the whisk and start whisking everything and breaking down the lumps. And that we want to make sure that, the firming of the cornstarch and obviously the thickening of the eggs we're going to be breaking them down. So the entire thing is going to be velvety smooth at the end, right? So whisk, break the lumps, and make sure, you guys, that this comes to a boil. You got to take it as far as a boil because we got to cook off the cornstarch, right? We don't want that starchy taste. You're going to say, wow, chef, is it safe for me to bring there's egg inside. Is it safe for me to bring it to a boil? Yes. For some reason, cornstarch is not going to allow the egg to cook. It's not going to allow the egg to curdle and break down into curdled chunks. So you can definitely bring it to a boil. You got to push that cornstarch all the way to the thickening power that it has. And once it comes to a boil, then you're going to be adding the butter and the vanilla flavor, mixing it really well, and you're going to be pouring it. The way that I like to do it is I like to get a sheet pan, and I'm going to show you guys a quick photograph that I have. I like to grab a sheet pan. Oh, it's right here. I don't mind using extra extra plastic, but I put plastic on the bottom of the sheet pan, lining it up. I pour my my pastry cream, on top of it. I spread it with a rubber spatula, making sure that I thin it out as much as I can. And then I place the plastic on top. I fold it over. And it's going to look something like this. Because we're working with cornstarch, if I leave this open just like that to the air, I'm going to come back to this, the top skin. It's going to form a skin on top. And it's going to be very dry and rubbery, So we want to prevent any air drying my pastry cream. So make sure that you put plastic on top, spread it out, let it cool down as quick as possible. This is it's a custard, you guys. So the idea is you got to bring the temperature down very quickly to make sure that it doesn't sit too long in the temperature danger zone. Remember, if it gets contaminated, right, hands, coughing or whatever happens, if it, or the plastic might have some sort of bacteria, whatever, you never know. Microorganisms are everywhere. So if it does become contaminated, the idea is to bring down the temperature very quickly and to cool it down and put it in the refrigerator right away so it doesn't sit in the temperature danger zone too long, because there's lots of protein for the bacteria to eat from and multiply, right? It is one of the custards. Custards in general is a type of item that we really close pay attention to in the pastry department, because we want to make sure that we don't get anybody sick. But we've got to work very clean. So the idea again is to spread it out, cool it down. I suggest to leave it sitting on the kitchen counter maybe for about 20 to 30 minutes, because if it's too hot and if you decide to put it in your refrigerator, it's going to start heating up your refrigerator very quickly, and now everything, all the food that you have inside is in the temperature danger zone. So please let it cool on the kitchen counter 20, 30 minutes, let it cool down as much as you can, and then put it in the refrigerator after that, okay? Now the next step is obviously to assemble, right? And the way to assemble, again, we're gonna need another piping bag, which is the best thing. If you do not have a piping bag, something smaller could be a sandwich bag. We're just gonna be putting the pastry cream inside the sandwich bag or the piping bag, cutting a little piece, and I'm gonna show you. We gotta make 2 holes onto that fully cooked eclair, right? So I make 2 holes with, I like to use my, the probe, from my thermometer. I like to stick it, you can stick it on the sides or you can stick it on the top. And I like to make this kind of, once I'm injecting or putting the thermometer probe inside, I start going in a little circular motion inside the hollow part of the eclair so I can break any gluten strands that are blocking my way for the pastry cream to travel through. So I'm going to show you a quick, and of course you guys have a video to watch, right? But, we're going to be filling it up. There's different ways to do it. You can make the little holes from the tips right here. Sometimes people do it on the top, or sometimes people do it on the bottom. I recommend 2 holes, because when you start piping, you'll know that it's nice and full, because it's coming out of the other little hole that you have. All right, so that gives you an idea that it's nice and full. Also, the pastry is going to start feeling heavier, right? So that's another indication that it's nice and full. So once you fill it up, the next step, of course, is to dip it into chocolate. And like I said, you can either do straight melting chocolate. Of course, we need something that is about 60% cocoa solids. You can take the chocolate over a water bath, melt it completely, or you guys can do a ganache, and I'm going to talk about a ganache in a second. But the idea is to dip it, make sure that you get the entire surface on the top, shake off the excess by moving it back and forth. That way we can avoid all this extra dripping down, right? So if you guys dip it and then you flip it over and you didn't drizzle the excess chocolate, it's going to start dripping all over and it doesn't look good, right? So I try to avoid this. Something that's going to look very presentable, obviously something that looks like this. Very clean presentation, beautiful. Obviously it takes, some patience to do. But like I said, what I do is I dip it, and make sure that the mixture is not too hot. The hotter the mixture of the chocolate is, the more liquid and drippy it's going to be. So maybe let it cool down just a little bit, that it's still, that it still coats nicely. It's not firming up. But dip it, right? Let it drizzle back and forth. And then when you don't see a lot of chocolate drizzling out, then you flip it over and you put it over a sheet pan or a plate. And then you can let it set and firm up the chocolate. Let's talk really quickly about how to make ganache. So ganache is a combination of 2 ingredients. Very easy to do, you guys. It's heavy cream and it's chocolate. And again, I recommend chocolate that's roughly about 60% cocoa solids. So what you do is you put the chocolate, you can chop up the chocolate, whether you bought it into small little pieces or you bought the whole block. You can chop it up into smaller pieces, as small as you can. Put it in a bowl, and you're going to bring the heavy cream to a full boil. For making ganache, for dipping, you want to use a ratio that is 1-to-1. That means you use equal parts. 5 ounces of heavy cream, 5 ounces of chocolate, right? 10-10, 7-7. It's your choice how much you want to make, how much you're going to dip. So you're going to bring the heavy cream to a full boil. When you see it bubbling up and rising to the top of your pot, pour it into the bowl where you have your chocolate. Let it sit maybe for about a minute. That's going to be enough time for the chocolate to completely melt. And then get your rubber spatula and you're going to start mixing it. You need agitation because that is actually an emulsion, right? You've got to bring those two together so they don't separate. Ganache can be broken with heat, so it can slowly start breaking if it starts to thicken up, because it's cooling down too much. And if you decide to put it back onto a water bath, if you heat up the water bath too much, or if you let it sit too long, it can start breaking that ganache. So be careful with that. But again, it's equal parts heavy cream and chocolate. And it's very simple. Just bring the heavy cream to a full boil, add it to the chopped chocolate, right? Let it sit for a little bit and mix it around. Let it cool just a little bit, like I said. And then you guys can start dipping. So think about your production for this week, you guys. You definitely got to spread out the work, especially if you're a very busy person, right? It's going to take a little bit of time. Yes, Chef?
With ganache, it's another one that you can actually make a week ahead of time. Ganache actually keeps pretty darn well. When you want to heat your ganache back up, that's the other thing. If you make a ganache and it's, say your kitchen runs cold, it might get a little room temperature butter in consistency. It'll be a little bit thicker, not quite dipping consistency. You can pop it in the microwave, but only for like 5 seconds. It will need very, very little seconds to get really liquefied again. So the ganache is a great one to make ahead of time if you're a candy maker.
Yeah, and let's talk really quickly. What can you make ahead, you guys? Pat a choux. One of the things that I like to do is I like to make the dough, but I like to go all the way through to baking the product, whether it's whatever shape I'm going to decide to do, whatever pastries I'm going to do, whether it's eclair, cream puffs, Perry breast, whatever it is. I go ahead, make the dough, I pipe it, I bake it. Once I have my baked product, then you guys can actually take all those shells, we call them shells, right? Pat a choux shells, because they're empty. You can wrap them up and you can put them in the freezer, and they can actually hold in the freezer for 3 months. So you can definitely, just for production purposes, right? You can actually make it in advance. Like, let's say, for example, you want to do it today, or too late maybe today, but tomorrow, and then you want to freeze it, and then maybe 2 days later you make the pastry cream, and then you assemble. So they're going to hold really well frozen. If you do freeze them, I just want to give the heads up, they do absorb a little bit of humidity from the freezer. So the best thing to do is to take them out frozen, put them on a sheet tray, right? Lay them out on a sheet tray, and put them back at a 300-degree oven so you can dry them out just a little bit, maybe for about 8 minutes or so at 300 degrees is good. And then, of course, let them cool down completely, and then you start filling them with the pastry cream. Okay, you guys, any questions? I know we gave you guys lots of information for this week. This is the week, I'm going to say it is challenging because you have a lot of components to do. Yes, Chef.
Something I do want to specify with you guys is that I am looking for eclairs and not cream puffs. So if you see a cream puff option, that's not what I'm looking for. This week we want to work on those eclairs. The eclairs is going to teach you a few more techniques that could be applied to cream puffs. So remember, we're building our foundation, and then we can start practicing those other things. But for this week, I'm looking for eclairs.
Yeah, if you want to make the full recipe and bake a bunch of eclairs, and then you still have left for making cream puffs, go for it, But you got to present eclairs for this week. Okay, I do see Mandy. You have questions, Mandy?
Yes, to you. First of all, on the choux pastry, you said to use water can save your milk. Is there a major difference in what that does to the pastry, water versus milk?
Yes, Chef Jen.
Well, I will let you fully answer this question, but based on past students doing this exact recipe, most of them had more success with water than milk.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, milk just provides a little extra fat, right? But I think it's just, for me, I always think about the expense. You can do this dough just with straight water, right?
Okay.
It's more affordable that way. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, the butter or shortening, I had planned on using butter, but is there a significant difference between the two?
No, you can, if you're going to use shortening, you can use the same amount as what he calls for butter. But I recommend butter, just it has a lot better flavor at the end.
Now I have a cookie press that has the tips on it, you know, that I can use. I thought at first I might use it for the choux pastry, but then Chef Genevieve showed us that picture, and I'm like, no. But I thought it might be good to put the vanilla cream, the pastry cream, into the eclairs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially if you have like, you can exchange the tip size, right? You can put a smaller one so you can use it for filling up the shell with that. Yeah. Oh, that's perfect. Yeah. That's what that's for. It's for filling up. Perfect.
Yay! And two more questions. Can you use anything other than extract to flavor the pastry cream?
Okay, so to flavor custards, and of course I want you guys to stick to vanilla this time around, but there's different ways of flavoring the custard. You can either infuse flavor into the milk. That's one way of doing it. For example, adding teas, spices, like cinnamon, for example. You can do, let's see what else. Matcha green tea, you can put that in, right? And once it's infused into the milk, then of course you make the technique the same way. But now the flavor's inside the milk. Another way of doing it is once you have your pastry cream already made, you can actually put, the pastry cream, you can add, while it's still hot, you can throw chocolate in it to make chocolate pastry cream. You can put butter, peanut butter, you can do Nutella if you want, and it creates that flavor that you put in. Jams.
A fruit coulis, a fruit that you cook down, raspberry. So there's
exactly.
That was my thought, was raspberry, because I grabbed the 100% dark chocolate at the grocery store, and the best way I've ever found is to cut it with raspberry. So I didn't know so I'll do vanilla, but yeah, I'm thinking the raspberries would be good too. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Amy, hi Amy.
Okay, so
yeah, hi.
Okay, so I heard that you said you can make the pastry itself, the shell, in advance, and it can stay longer in the freezer. Now, what if, I work a lot and we had already talked about that. Could you make the filling in advance and refrigerate that, or can that go in the freezer? Like, if you make that advance, or do you have to do that like one at a time?
That's a great question, Amy. The custard, because it is a custard, the longer we hold it, the more it's going to, I always prevent, holding it too long, just because the fact that, what about if bacteria got in there, and it starts to grow in there. So I like to hold my custard between 4 to 5 days, the longest. So the longer you let it hold, the less time you have to eat those eclairs. You got to eat them faster. So I would say you can just to be on the safe side, make the custard maybe 1 day in advance. So plan it out, The more days you wait, the less time you have to eat the eclairs, because now the custard's inside. So like I said, after 4 or 5 days, I have to get rid of it and make a fresh batch.
Yeah, I was thinking that you can load the shell in advance and freeze it for like months. And I was thinking, well, what if I do the eclair shells one day, freeze them, and then I go to work the day after or whatever, and then 2 days later decide to make the filling, the eclair filling, and later on that night maybe take them out, fill them up, or maybe fill like 2-3 up that day, and then do the assignment, and then maybe put them like in the refrigerator or whatever, and then the day after make like a full amount, because I've got the extra time.
Yeah, that would be fine, Amy, because it sounds like you're just letting the custard sit for like 2 days. It's no big deal. Like I said, if you let it go 4 to 5 days, that's the most I would let a custard go. Do not freeze custards, you guys. They don't work. The liquid starts to come out when you start thawing it out, and it just looks all broken and curled. It's weird. Don't ever freeze. But after 5 days, I would say throw it away. Whether they're in a clear form or, I wanted to say one more thing, you guys. I know we're almost coming to an end here. When the pastry cream is chilled and cold, it's going to feel rubbery, you know. So the amount that you're going to be using to fill the eclairs, I would say cut the amount out of the sheet tray, put it in a bowl, and use a whisk to break it down so you can soften that custard again. So it's pliable, it's pipeable, because it's going to feel all stiff and weird. Okay, so make sure you do that. Okay, oh, Mary Lou, this is the last question, and then we're going to be done. Hi, Mary Lou.
Hi, Chef. Really quick, on the discussion question for the week, is that something that we have to go back and comment on 2 others the way we have been doing in the past, or just do what it says?
No, this one is a discussion between you guys. So yeah, make sure you guys post your initial post by Saturday or Sunday. And this is about, very simple, you guys. You go onto the internet, you take a picture of, somebody's menu, right? From a restaurant, take a picture of the dessert, and you just tell us what you like, what you didn't like, the pros, the cons, and what would you do different. Very easy discussion. You post your initial post, and then, of course, come back so you can start responding. We just need 2 responses from 2 other students. That way you guys can get your full 10 points. I do see a lot of students that they only do the initial post and then they never come back. So they're stuck with 6 points, okay, you guys? Just to give you a heads up, week 2, 3, week 8, and of course week 10, they're all open. So if you have missed the discussion forum for any of those weeks, you can still go back. I always go back every day to double check to see if anybody has posted anything so I can grade it. But you still have the opportunity to still go back and get points. So if you say, oh, why did I get a 6 on the discussion forum? That means you didn't respond to 2 students. So go back to that week and respond. You got your 10 points. Easy, okay, you guys? Thank you, Mary Lou. Thank you for bringing that up.
Okay.
I almost forgot. Okay, you guys, thank you so much. Gabriel, one last question, and that's it, you guys. We got to go after that. Hi, Gabriel.
Hi. Is the pitcher necessary for the dessert?
I do want to see what you're talking about. Yeah. Or a link, you know, but at least something that I can see. I want to see what you're talking about. What is it that you didn't like, you know?
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Gabriel. Okay, you guys, thank you so much for joining us today live. And of course, I'm looking forward to next week, week 11. We're actually doing frozen desserts. So we're doing a Freddy, oh my God, I went black. A semi-Freddo next week. So make sure that you guys, we're almost there. We're almost there, week 11 already. And you guys have only 1 more week of, or 2, week 10 and 11 of the quizzes. So you're almost there. All right, you guys, thank you so much. Thank you, Chef Genevieve. And I will see you guys next Wednesday. Have a wonderful week, you guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.